The year is 1859, and the stage is set for an international disaster. The two largest global powers, the United States and Great Britain, were locked in a tense, protracted border dispute over a small, forested piece of land in the Pacific Northwest, the San Juan Islands. Control of these islands meant control over vital navigational straits in the region, making them a strategic prize far greater than their size suggested. The conflict was rooted in a careless mistake made years earlier in the 1846 Oregon Treaty. This treaty intended to draw the border between the two nations across the water, but the language was tragically vague. It simply stated the boundary should run through the middle of the channel separating the continent from Vancouver's island. This was the core issue, because the channel split into two major routes, the Haro Strait and the Rosario Strait. The San Juan Islands lay directly between these two competing claims. Thus, both countries laid claim to the entire archipelago. Despite the serious geopolitical stakes, a fragile peace existed on the main San Juan Island. American farmers had settled on one side, planting potatoes and raising families. On the other, the Hudson's Bay Company had established a large, profitable sheep ranch and an outpost staffed by employees. The relationship between the settlers was tense, but remarkably peaceful. Everyone knew a single incident, a trivial squabble, a moment of carelessness, could shatter the peace and ignite a massive international conflict. Everyone, it seemed, was walking on eggshells. But the island's residents had not accounted for the destructive appetites of livestock, specifically one determined hungry pig. The pivotal moment arrived on June 15, 1859. An American settler named Lyman Cutlar, having staked his claim and planted his crops, woke up that morning to find his patch of potatoes under assault. Again! A large black pig was happily rooting around, tearing up the soil and eating the crop, clearly uncaring of the delicate balance of international relations. The pig belonged to Charles Griffin, an Irish employee of the British Hudson's Bay Company. Cutlar had warned Griffin repeatedly about the trespassing pig. It kept coming back, transforming a simple property line into a continuous source of irritation. On this morning, Cutlar had enough. He aimed his rifle and shot the pig, instantly killing it. The quiet truce that had lasted for years was now dead, killed by a potato-loving swine. Cutlar immediately sought out Charles Griffin to explain what had happened and offer compensation. The atmosphere was fraught. Griffin, enraged by the death of his animal, was determined to make an example of Cutlar. The argument was no longer about a potato patch, it was about sovereignty. Griffin demanded an exorbitant $100 for the pig, a massive sum equivalent to roughly $3,500 in today's currency, far exceeding the pig's true value. Cutlar offered a reasonable $10. Griffin vehemently refused the offer and immediately upped the ante, threatening to have the American farmer arrested by British authorities for violating British law on British soil. This was the critical jurisdictional leap. The dispute had officially escalated from a personal squabble to a profound challenge of national sovereignty. The message was clear: this island belongs to us. Lyman Cutlar panicked. Fearing imminent arrest and removal from what he believed was American territory, he called on his country for protection. This distress call reached Brigadier General William S. Harney, commanding the U.S. forces in the region. General Harney, already known for his aggressive stance on expanding American territory, seized the opportunity. Without consulting his superiors or the president, he immediately dispatched a company of American soldiers to the island. The initial contingent was small, just 66 soldiers, but their commander was a resolute man named Captain George Pickett, who would later achieve fame, or notoriety, as a general in the Confederate Army. Pickett rapidly established a position on the southern end of the island, fortifying the beachhead and declaring the site American Camp. His orders from Harney were simple: protect the American settlers at all costs. The British, observing the sudden arrival of armed U.S. troops, were stunned. They immediately saw Pickett's arrival as an unwarranted, hostile invasion of British territory. The Hudson's Bay Company officials contacted Governor Douglas in nearby Fort Victoria, demanding a military response to repel the American forces. The confrontation that had begun with a $10 pig now involved the prestige of the British Empire. The response from the Royal Navy was overwhelming, swift, and entirely disproportionate to the small American presence. Governor Douglas mobilized the Pacific Squadron, sending 5 major warships, frigates and sloops, with a combined troop strength exceeding 2,140 combatants and mounting over 70 cannons in total. The American forces, numbering only 461 men and 14 cannons, were completely surrounded and hopelessly outnumbered. The standoff was excruciating. Over 2,000 highly trained, well-equipped armed men were now facing each other across a few hundred yards of forest and beach, all over a pig. Captain Pickett and his men were dug in at American Camp, their small artillery pieces defiantly overlooking the strait, daring the superior British naval forces to attempt a landing. For weeks, they stood frozen. The British commander, Rear Admiral Robert L. Baines, anchored his fleet and issued his orders. He commanded the American forces to immediately withdraw from the island. Pickett, following General Harney's rash instructions, refused. The tension reached its breaking point. Rear Admiral Baines gave the ultimate command. The command was terrifyingly clear: fire on the Americans. Had this order been carried out, the subsequent slaughter of American troops would have guaranteed a full-scale war between Great Britain and the United States, a conflict that would have dramatically reshaped the history of both nations and the North American continent. The world was seconds away from a catastrophe caused by one dead pig. Yet the war never started. The order to open fire was met with a principled, conscious refusal. Captain Geoffrey Fix Hornby, second in command of the British fleet, refused to comply. He defied his superior officer in what would become one of the most remarkable acts of de-escalation in military history. He recognized the sheer absurdity of the situation. Captain Hornby's words became the moral thesis statement of the entire affair. He declared, with resolved conviction, the words that saved the two great nations from war. His famous quote, forever etched in the annals of history, serves as a powerful reminder of leadership and restraint in the face of crisis. I will not involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. News of the near-fatal incident and the massive military buildup quickly reached both Washington, D.C. and London. Officials in both governments were horrified at the jingoistic overreach and the prospect of war over a single piece of livestock. President Buchanan and the British government were unified in their panic, issuing immediate, urgent counter-orders to their respective commanders. Their message, sent across thousands of miles, was direct and unified. Stand down. Do not start a war over a pig. To ensure the de-escalation, President Buchanan sent the General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, General Winfield Scott, to the island to personally negotiate a stand-down. Scott was a renowned diplomat and successfully negotiated a temporary solution: a joint military occupation. For the next 12 years, the opposing forces, the British Marine Corps and the U.S. Army, lived together on the island. The American camp was established in the south, the British camp in the north, and they effectively created a shared, demilitarized zone. the confrontation transformed from a bitter standoff into a remarkable and unexpected example of peaceful cohabitation. The soldiers did not fight. Instead, they adapted. They socialized, attended each other's theatrical performances, shared picnics and parties, and even held joint celebrations for each other's national holidays. The long period of shared humanity proved what Captain Hornby already understood. The conflict was one of politics and treaties, not of people. 0 human shots were ever fired during the entire confrontation. This state of peaceful, armed neutrality persisted through the entirety of the American Civil War and beyond, as both nations waited for a diplomatic solution. Finally, in 1872, both governments agreed to submit the dispute for international arbitration, bringing in a completely impartial third party to interpret the confusing language of the Oregon Treaty. The dispute was placed in the hands of Kaiser Wilhelm I of the German Empire. The Kaiser, after reviewing all the evidence, finally made his definitive ruling. He ruled in favor of the American position, determining that the Haro Strait, closest to Vancouver Island, constituted the international border. The San Juan Islands officially belonged to the United States. Great Britain immediately accepted the impartial ruling of the Kaiser and withdrew all its forces, thus ending the greatest international crisis to be triggered by a single piece of livestock. Today, San Juan Island National Historical Park commemorates the Pig War, a bloodless conflict that stands as a unique testament to diplomatic prudence, moral courage, and the triumph of common sense over the ultimate absurdity